to the Twist Culture podcast. We have a guest this evening, again, very exciting, starting our podcast, having guests. This is Joe Nolan. Joe does so many things. What do you not do? He does so many things, we're not sure what he doesn't do. Do you have a question about werewolves? Ask this guy. Do you have a question about art? Ask this guy. So many things. Tell me, Joe, when did you move to Nashville? Why did you come here?
I moved to Nashville in 1992 from Detroit. Well, from, technically at that point I was living in East Lansing, Michigan, where I went to college at Michigan State University. Mm-hmm. So I moved here in September of 92 after I graduated, and a friend of mine took some time and drove all around the country and stuff, and then I ended up coming here after that. And I came down here to pursue music. Ah. Not a big surprise.
There's a lot of people here to do that.
A few. Just a few.
And you began playing around town?
Mm-hmm. And in August of 93, I got a publishing deal with a small publishing company called Black and White Music, which was a BMI publishing firm in Nashville. Publishing firm, a publishing house, whatever. And I wrote songs for them for 2 years. And then right around then was like the beginning of really digital recording really started to happen at that time. That's like when the early, digital storefronts started, like mp3.com, and nobody even remembers what that is. But that was like MySpace before MySpace. And anyway, so like right around that time it started, things were right for me to sort of just start finding ways to do these things on my own, kind of like, so I've been doing, recording and releasing stuff independently ever since then.
How many albums have you made?
I've only made 3 that I've actually finished, but I have essentially have 2 records that are sort of sitting on the shelf right now, waiting for me to finish them for one reason or another. And basically the only thing that's holding me up right now is just getting the money to finish them, really. Mm-hmm. Because there's certain things I want to do, and they're just going to cost some money, and I could do them other ways that would be cheaper, but they wouldn't turn out very good. They wouldn't turn out the way I wanted them to.
And where, if people are looking to listen to your music online, could they do this?
They could go to joenolan.com and hear a lot of stuff. They could go. I've got a Reverb Nation account, which is like another music, sort of like catch-all sort of website. Mm-hmm. Social network in a way. Mm-hmm. If you just go to reverbnation.com/Joe Nolan, I guess is what it is. And that's a pretty good spot actually, because I've got all the records are up there, and you can listen to them and download them and all that stuff. So I distribute everything through a website called TuneCore that basically will put the songs in all the digital storefronts, so you get handy. So you finish an album and then you give it to them. It doesn't really cost that much. It's a pretty good deal. It's not. It does cost a little bit, but you get your album in like all of the iTunes, Amazon, all those places at once. Spotify, everywhere. Nice. So really, any of those modes, if people listen on iTunes or whatever, they can find all my music on there. They can find all my music on Spotify, whatever. Mm-hmm. This is what, this is part of the reason why, like, in 95 I started doing more of this stuff on my own, because it became obvious that it was going to get easier and easier to just make everything available without giving up any control creatively.
Yeah, which is important, and that
it's
is a big stumbling block for a lot of people.
It's a big deal, and I think I didn't really have too many issues with that, like when I was with my publishing company or whatever. To a large degree, we were, we just sort of, we didn't really accomplish a whole lot together, Mm-hmm. I learned a few things, I made the most of a couple years of writing songs, but ultimately, if there had been more progress or something, we would have probably continued to work together, but it wasn't really a thing of things being terrible. It was just things not really doing much of anything. But in the meantime, I was losing a certain amount of control over the songs in those catalogs as a result of the deal. and it was a question of, you know, is it smarter just to try to accomplish these things on your own? And in many ways, I mean, it's I don't really know why any, like, you know, talented musician, songwriter, person would want to do it any other way, frankly. Yeah. You know, I mean, everybody wants to find opportunities and things, but I mean, it's just, there's so many options now for people to create and distribute and, you know, present their own work, you know, exactly how they want it to be, you know, so which is, it's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah. Of course, I feel like in the art world and maybe in the music world, the downside to that is that you have to wear so many hats at the same time. Like, you have to learn how to do all those things on the computer, which is like usually what someone else would do. It's a whole separate skill set.
Yeah.
It's like you're like 3 or 4 people.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, you get pretty busy pretty fast, but yeah, but it's ultimately, I don't know, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting to be doing it, though, and it's pretty interesting to know so many people in Nashville who are in the same boat, you know. I was looking at our friend Julie Lee's like little promotional video for her new album, and it's so rad, you know. I mean, it was just such a great little video, and she's got so many great people working with her and stuff, you know. But I mean, she's really built her reputation, you know, just on her own, you know, just writing songs and making connections and doing good projects and playing good shows, and you know, somehow she got that great voice. You know?
Somehow.
Yeah, I think we're all a little jealous.
Yes, definitely. So
we've got notes.
We have notes.
We're looking at notes.
We have show notes. We're ready.
It was my idea.
Music, it is Jeff's idea. Because he's brilliant. But music leads to art writing? How do we get there?
Well, you know, I started in 2005-ish. I already had, I'd had JoeNolan.com for forever. And it's been various kind of websites. At one point it was a GeoCities website. Do you remember what those were? Those were pretty rad. but also kind of like limited, and it was kind of an early experiment in social networking in a way, but it was like a bunch of, you know, like, you had this capability to sort of, you know, put together like a ready-made website that was just like a template, you know, and you could go in and customize this template, and depending on what kind of website you had, you would be like it was almost like they were trying to locate people in like almost like they were treating it like geography, you know. So like if you had like an art music website, then you'd be in Soho. You know,
right.
Things like that. I don't remember all of them at this point, but I was in Soho, so you'd have this little website down there. But anyway, so JoeNolan.com has migrated around a bit, but it's been pretty much the same website for a while now. I've got an eye to update it this year if I can, to get some things done on it just to make it a little more current. But in 2005, I started. I wanted to do more. You know, just do more writing, essentially. You know, like journalistically in a way, but I wasn't really thinking in those terms. I was just thinking about things I wanted to write about. Like, I really want to write about this thing or that thing, and I started looking at blogging, because blogging is a great way to bring people to your site. You know, if you're constantly updating a blog, as far as all the, you know, spiders and whatever other arachnids are running around in the internet, as far as those guys know, all they're seeing is new content, and then that's gonna roll your site up higher, you know, in the search engines.
Bots. Something bots.
Yeah, all these. Yeah, there's a bunch of different types of things, but you know, what it really does is it helps your page rank be higher and all that stuff. Again, you got to become an expert in search engine optimization if you want to be a musician. Yeah, you better.
It's not about 3 chords and the truth anymore. It's about your computer savviness.
Yeah. It's about everything. But anyway, so I decided I would start blogging. But as soon as I started blogging, I was immediately like realizing that, like, okay, I want to write this little thing. And then I'd be like, 700, 800, 900, 1,200 words later.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, this is massive. Like, I'm writing, this is like turning into like a project that's taking me days on end to write this blog post. And it was like, this is, and the thing of it was, is I wanted to write that much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I began to think, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I should really consider, actually pursuing, doing more freelance writing if I'm going to do this, because I essentially can't afford to just sit here blogging all day long, for my own health or whatever,
Right.
So, in college I had published a few articles and things, so it wasn't like a totally foreign idea to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd worked on a newspaper when I was in college, things like that. So then I started doing freelance writing, and I just kind of started writing about everything I was interested in, really, and that's kind of I'll talk about that in a second, but anyway, so I started doing that, and then I don't really remember. I think the scene was the first publication I started doing art writing for, the Nashville Tn. And then shortly after that, I started writing stuff for Number, an independent journal of the arts. Perhaps you've heard of it.
It's very, very good.
It is good. There's a new issue coming out soon, and there's supposed to be a party for it. So
I have heard about this party. I'm looking forward to it.
Do you know what it's going to be?
It'll be at the Chestnut place, I think.
Really?
I got an email from Chuck.
Really?
Really?
Did he already? So that's set. You heard it here first, Nashville.
I think he's working on it.
Chestnut Square. Be there.
It's coming together. It's coming together.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Just hold on. Figure it out.
Just, that's the rumor.
That's the rumor. Yeah.
Rumor mill.
But I like that idea. I like that idea of having like it reminds me a bit of the way that the rabbit would do the same thing. It really got a lot of attention for itself and stuff just by throwing a big party to say,
Chuck.
Oh yeah, so Chuck Beard is the editor of Number, an independent journal of the arts. And he's only been doing it for half a year, I guess. And I think that's a lot of what he's talked to me about wanting to do, is just sort of inject it with some of that same kind of energy that the rabbit had. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we already talked about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but I'm looking forward to it. I hope we do that, because it'd be fun to get people together and sort of celebrate that journal a bit more, because it always just seems like it sort of falls through the cracks in a weird way. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. But anyway, so I started writing for Number right around that same time, and then I've written for lots of other things and about a lot of other things. I mean, a lot of people in Nashville know, just because my name's in the paper for doing it, locally, that people know that I write about art. But I write about like a whole bunch of different stuff, and I've done.
What was that you wrote for something in England about a squirrel?
That's the only time anyone's ever going to ask me a question with those words in a row like that. That one time in England with the squirrel. What was that about? There's a magazine. This will be a good way to start talking about podcasting too. There's a magazine called Fortean Times, Fortean, Fortean, which is Forteana is a word that is a play on the last name of Charles Fort. And Charles Fort, back in the, I want to say like 1800s, I guess is what it would be, maybe early 1900s as well. He was one of the first, or maybe the first guy ever who wanted to do this, probably, let alone actually did it. But he just, for some reason, started to collect bits and pieces of information about unexplained phenomenon, right? So he was one of the first people to actually create a record of, in Pennsylvania in 1876, Mrs. Murphy went out to milk her cow, and, was, all of a sudden salmon started falling from the sky or whatever. There's all sorts of fish from the sky, frogs from the sky, all sorts of weird phenomena, unexplained, things in the sky, you name it. There's all these like weird sort of paranormal occurrences and strange natural occurrences and things like this. So he's a really interesting guy, and there's a magazine in London called the Fortean Times, And I've published a couple of different articles with them. One of them, the Squirrel one, was about the scrat. Okay, and it was kind of a combination of things. It was about the fact that there was a cartoonist, an American cartoonist, who claims that this character in the Ice Age cartoon, okay, who I believe is called the Scrat.
I think so.
Who's just this weird little rodent guy.
Always looking for the acorn.
Yeah, that she had introduced a character to Disney as a possible character that they might be interested in. They said no, and then with like a year later, here comes this thing in Ice Age. So she was saying, what's up with that? Then it also tied into like an urban legend in California, in New York. It's probably in big cities everywhere though. But every now and then somebody will see something weird, which is probably just a giant rat, okay? And it could even be a weird rat, you know, or a weird mangy squirrel or something like this. But people have seen these things and they've convinced themselves that what they've seen is half rat, half squirrel. Scrat. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, it's like genetically impossible. Like they can't mate. Essentially, is what it comes down to. Right. They could try, but it's not going to be. It won't be a fruitful union. So there was that angle. The other angle was that. These guys, I want to say they were in Vietnam, had discovered like this giant prehistoric squirrel, essentially, you know, and it was in this part of the jungle where it's just like, you know, it's really insane jungles, and they're still finding stuff to this day every now and then. So things they thought were extinct, this is something they thought would have been extinct. So I actually wrote that article quite a while ago, but it was just sort of tying together all these different like unexplained things and all this stuff for that magazine. And then I've written a few other things for them. It's kind of slipped in my mind. Oh, there was one thing I wrote for them about the Mexican man bat, which was this sort of this creature. Sort of, it's actually weird. It kind of parallels some of the Mothman mythology. So this guy, several people had made several sightings of a very large humanoid with big bat wings who was like chasing this one kid in the night, like while he was driving. This thing was like right on his car, like flying after him and whatever. So there was some interesting things to write about. But that is a good place to move us into this next thing that we were going to talk about regarding podcasting. Welcome to a podcast. This is a podcast. My podcasts are strictly audio podcasts. Oh. So you know, I thank you for the opportunity to see and be seen.
Yes. Well, for
it's
two
very
reasons,
lonely being an audio podcast.
I would think so. For 2 reasons, I only like to begin projects the most difficult way possible. And
yes.
Podcast
that'll suck.
Being primarily about art, I thought maybe we should be able to see things in case someone brought some art or something.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that sounds good. Or and then you could also like do like a little slideshow in the middle of this or something. Right now, slideshow. Do this every time. Have people do this every time. Slideshow. Okay.
Dream machine.
So.
Podcasting.
Podcasting. Yeah. So there was a podcast called. There's a website called Disinformation.com. Okay. They're a blog. They kind of evolved over the years. They kind of went through a first generation and now they're on a second generation. But they are a blog site and they're also a publisher. And if anybody goes to disinformation.com and looks at the books and DVDs they've done a bunch of stuff that you know about. Like they've actually got a lot of great titles and things. So they started having this podcast, and the podcast was basically they grabbed these guys who were all connected to the University of Georgia years ago. Okay, they had a podcast that was sort of conspiracy theories and Fortean phenomena and alternative history and all this kind of stuff, magic, occult studies, and all these things were all mixed up in there. And they really did a great job because they were all very knowledgeable, but at the same time they were all smart. And so they would talk about these out there subjects that the show is actually called Out There. And so they would talk about these out there subjects.
Is it still on that podcast?
No, but the archive is still available. So if you looked up Out There podcast, you'd find. I believe they did like an even 50 shows or something. Nice. It was excellent. It was an excellent show, and I was a fan of it when it was still running. And as I was saying, they did this thing where they would talk about these things very, very open-mindedly and very intelligently, but at the same time they wouldn't like really put up with, you know, with people's BS basically, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, this guy's just a liar and a charlatan, you know. Let's talk about how this guy was a liar and a charlatan, you know what I mean?
Right.
As opposed to a lot of, and a lot of things in that world, I mean, they can get, you're already dealing with weird stuff, and like it can quickly get like deceptive and bizarre, and you know, con games and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all, you know, it's all crazy. So they did a great job of like riding that wave between, you know, being open-minded and thought-provoking, but at the same time, you know, being you know, critically skeptical as well. But they did these great shows. So Disinfo, you know, being smart, really approached them, if I understand correctly. This is several years ago, and asked them, "Hey, we want to start a podcast. Why don't you just do the podcast?" You know, and they decided they didn't want to keep calling it out there, so they decided they ended up coming up with 2 podcast formats they wanted to do: the Disinformation, the podcast, and the Disinformation World News. Okay. And so of course it was a good move for both of them, because they got to continue to do the podcast, and at the same time, like, you know, it gave Disinfo the sort of the ability to sort of piggyback on the success those guys had already created for themselves.
Yeah.
So they started the Disinformation World News podcast. Was always more of like them talking, them coming up with little things to report on and stuff like this. And the Disinformation, the podcast, was usually involved interviewing an author. So like they would bring on an author and they would just talk about the latest book and all this stuff like that.
Yeah.
So one day, a friend of mine, Aaron Miles, who was also a fan of that podcast, told me that he had heard that on the podcast. I hadn't heard this episode. They mentioned something about you know, if there's anyone out there who's got a great idea for the show, you should just contact us. You know, we're always interested in hearing new ideas and stuff.
Yeah.
So he mentioned that to me, and so I wrote to the 2 main guys. Not Austin Gandy, but I may have written him too. He was a guy who did a regular segment on the show. But Raymond Wiley and Joe McFall. And I emailed both those guys, and then I went to Chicago to work on one of my albums. Okay,
nice.
So I was in Chicago working on one of the records that's currently on my shelf, and that's how long ago that got started.
Wish you should come back on to promote.
I will. I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
So I emailed them, and while I was up in Chicago, I heard back from Joe, and it turns out that Joe already, you know, at that I was able to talk about, you know, I had written this stuff for 40 times, all this different stuff, and then it just turned out that, you know, this well-crafted. Oh, and at that point I had also started doing some stuff for Nashville Public Radio, so I had a bit of that to sort of share, like, you know, like I know a bit about how to write for this kind of a format or whatever. So it turns out that he already knew about my blog. Okay,
nice.
I had already been listening to their show. He had already been reading my blog. So we were already sort of acquainted in this really serendipitous way.
Nice.
So I started doing for them. My blog is called Insomnia, and I started to do these segments on that show that were called Insomnia, okay? And I put like a bumper, my music on the front and back of it, and they'd really just be these kind of standalone segments. And then every now and then we would get on Skype and we would talk to each other, have a little bit of repartee or whatever, but there was a lot of times when that got difficult to do, and it was easy for me just to do my thing on my own, and then they'd plug it in.
Yeah.
So in those segments I would just talk about all sorts of like historical, kind of esoteric kind of stuff. So I would talk about, as I was saying earlier, I would talk about, you know, the European folk history of werewolves, or there was a couple, I did like a 2 or 3 segment, like, you know, like 2 or 3 podcasts in a row. I did this long, it was way too long actually. I did this very long expose on various Hollow Earth mythologies. You just all these different people who you know believe there's like a world inside of the world. I can't remember everything. I did like a long, like too long, kind of like several episode expose on various Hollow Earth theories, you know, and ideas about, you know, mythologies and stuff about people who believe there's like a world inside of the world. I did, it was too long. I got a little carried away. But there was a lot to talk about. See, it was just like the whole blogging thing, you know. Once I was in there, I just wanted to explore more and more. It's always a problem, but maybe who knows, maybe I can do something longer about it one day. We decided we wanted to do one last episode because the disinformation world news thing had just sort of just drifted off, and it had been like a year since we'd done a podcast. So just for a variety of reasons, one of the guys moved to England, another one of the guys had a lot of like turmoil in his family life. So there's been a lot, you know, to it. But we decided, you know, we really need to pull our act together and send this thing off right, because we all felt like a certain amount of pride about it, you know, and really felt like it deserved it. So the last one I did was all about the author Carlos Castaneda, and he's the guy who wrote about this Don Juan character, Don Juan Matos, that was how you said it. But he wrote a whole series of books, and the very first one's called The Teachings of Don Juan, and it's like a classic 60s counterculture book. I think it was actually published in the early 70s, which is actually kind of perfect because it very much sort of feeds on where people were at that time, and basically sells a total fiction as anthropological research, you know. Yeah. And he actually, I mean, this book was actually like his thesis essentially, and he fooled a whole lot of people into thinking that it was real in some way, and it's really pretty much, there's so much evidence that just says it's all made up. But anyway, so people can check that out. That's if they go to the Disinformation website and look up Disinformation World News Podcast, they can hear all of those. Nice. I've got some plans to do some things with those, like maybe to put out something on my own that would maybe revise and re-record those segments that I did, and add new stuff, and maybe it's like an audiobook or an ebook of some kind or something.
That would be really cool.
So yeah. So I'm trying to think about how I want to do that. So that could be coming. But in the meantime, last fall, I guess it was, I had been contacted by a guy named Ken Eakins, and Ken was running a podcast during the same time we were doing the Disinfo podcast. And his podcast was called Right Where You Are Sitting Now. And it was kind of a similar thing, you know, kind of a counterculture podcast. And we were all sort of like kind of aware of one another and sort of friendly, you know, supported one another. I want to say that the Disinfo site for a short time actually, I want to say they actually were a place that also hosted the Sitting Now podcast, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a bit of a cross-pollination between us. So last summer or so like that, I got a friend request from Ken on Facebook, and then a few weeks later he said, "Hey, I've got this great idea for a podcast. Would you be interested in being a part of it?" And so now it's myself, a guy named Joe Matheny, who is author. He created arguably easily one of my favorite websites ever on the internet, which is a website called incannabula.org. I'm hoping I'm doing that right. But it's it's sort of an online, it was kind of a pretty, I mean, in my circles, in those circles, it was a pretty famous online hoax that went on for several years. And it was an amazing website, and I won't say anything about it. People should just go check it out.
Yeah.
But and then Ken, of course, and Ken's based out of the UK, so Ken, and then a guy that he does another music podcast with named Kim Monahan, who's also in the UK. Those guys, we all get together every week. We've done it 20 times now. And we've taken a week off here and there for Christmas and whatnot, but we get together every week and talk about this kind of stuff. We talk about, like, you know, like sort of radical politics and counterculture, music, art, all that stuff, but kind of edgier issues about those things, you know. I'm trying to think of some of the things we talked about today. I mean, you have to people should just go check it out. It's pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, and that you can find that at sittingnow.co.uk, sittingnow.co.uk, and then at alterati.com is another site you can find it at. That's Joe Matheny's website, one of many of his websites, and then I usually post the episodes to my blog as we finish them. And there's actually some interesting buzz going on about that podcast, and I will, if you would like me to, I'll come back and talk about that. If some of these things that I think may be happening with it could, you know, they'll just be things that'll lead to us getting a whole lot more audience and exposure for the podcast. So we'll come back and talk about that at some point.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Yes.
So that's the podcasting.
That's the podcasting. Music. We kind of talked about music, didn't we, already?
I guess a little bit.
Yeah.
What do we?
How it all goes together, all these different parts.
I could talk about. Do you want me to talk about the Occupy song at all?
Oh yeah.
Let me talk about that.
Do that.
So let me do that. so that's an interesting little project that happened last year. I had been going, like really last year ended up being a weird year in terms of politics for me, because it was just like all year long I found myself like going to all these rallies and all these, you know, marches and protests and whatnot. And it all kind of started when a group of friends of mine and I had gone to West End to protest during the Egyptian Revolution, right? So we were down there with a group of Egyptians who live in Nashville, a few of whom are friends of mine, and so we had gone there sort of to support them and to sort of, you know, just, you know, make noise basically. And then shortly after that is when all the education stuff erupted in Wisconsin.
Oh yes.
And then that was followed by the same thing happening here. So me and a bunch of friends of mine who are teachers, you know, were, you know, going to the plaza every weekend, it seemed like, because there was just another big rally and another big rally. And then right after that, Occupy happened. And so I started going down to the Occupy General Assemblies, especially on the weekends, and go down there and see what was going on and take it all in. And I started following all the various live streams and things, you know, from all over the country, really. And we have several friends of ours who are involved in that whole scene. And I started, you know, covering that stuff in my blog to some degree on the Coincidence Control Network. We talked about it constantly, and it was kind of nice for me to be able to have the opportunity to specifically talk about Nashville's Occupy, because I think it was an incredibly successful encampment, like,
and very large.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was
stable. Like.
Yeah, and it was definitely, there's a lot about it that was really, really exemplary, you know, and it was nice to have the sort of opportunity to really kind of tell that story to like a bigger place outside of just the city. So I was doing all that stuff and kind of, you know, finding my feet, like, you know, with like the idea that, you know, the best contributions I can make are sort of just to kind of keep doing the things I'm already doing, but, you know, do as much as I can to sort of, you know, focus back on the occupation in Nashville and whatnot. Well, a couple days after I'd gone, or it was like the second time I'd been to a General Assembly or whatever. And the General Assembly, for people who don't know, it's just like basically the ongoing, you know, depending on the camp, they do it more or less often, and they're still doing it in Nashville, even though the camp has officially, you know, been disbanded or whatever. Yeah. People are still meeting up for these meetings, and they're basically a way to address, you know, the issues of the day, a way to talk about what are our goals and plans in the immediate future. There's the various working groups that are involved in the movement, you know, and that gives them a chance to meet up and break off and talk about whatever they need to be doing and organizing with each other. So it's just sort of it's the best place to go if you want to find out more and become a part of what's going on. You go to that meeting and that'll get you there.
Cool.
And so so I went to this meeting. I'd been to like once or twice already. But I mean, when I first went, I was so blown away by how well organized and how just inspiring the whole thing was, that in a way I couldn't really figure out what the hell it was, because I was just kind of like dumbstruck by the whole thing, because it was way beyond anything that I thought was possible. Well, I hate to say that. It was way beyond anything I thought it would be, actually.
Yeah.
And the only reason I recoil from my own words is because in a way I'm kind of like addressing something that for me it was a thing where, you know, I don't know, I've always had kind of radical like political ideas and stuff, and I think I'd gotten to a point in my life where I sort of thought that some of the ideals that I had I think I had gotten to a point where I wasn't even aware of the fact of how little I believed they were possible anymore. And then when I went to the occupation, I think the thing that blew me away and took me a little while to sort of assimilate was the fact that I was seeing this thing that I had almost come to not believe was possible, And basically that has a lot to do with just, groups of determined, passionate people, like organizing themselves for their own sake, in their own way, on their own terms, and actually being effective, and, people, it's a kind of it doesn't sound dangerous, but it really is sort of a dangerous idea, and it really sort of calls into question a lot of our social order and our political order and all that stuff, because it sort of says, it begins to ask, what is it really necessary?
Right.
It's like it's an anarchist thing, and it was really inspired. It inspired me big time. I mean, it continues to. But anyway, so one day when I was leaving the occupation, it was a Saturday. I had this idea in my head that what was really amazing about it was that I just felt so like I couldn't not do something. I couldn't not be a part of it in some way after feeling that way about it. And I had this idea in my head. I was like, yeah, it's like an apathy inoculation. Like in some weird way, it's like you can no longer feel apathetic. Like if you go down there and if you open yourself to this thing, you will not be able to not do something. You know what I mean? And of course, like a robot monkey or something, I was like, it's an apathy inoculation. Then I was like, come on down to the occupation. And then I was like, we're not going to do this, are we? And then I was like, yeah, I think we're going to do this. And which was, I think I'm going to write like some kind of a topical protest song. So all of a sudden this line's in my head, it's an apathy inoculation, come on down to the occupation. And I was just like a little bit like taken aback and like realizing that, yeah, I'm actually I'm already writing a song about this. And I didn't really want to, because I've never written like a topical protest song, because I don't like topical protest songs, because they're topical mainly, and meaning that, like when somebody like, Woody Guthrie writes "This Land Is Your Land" or something like that, to some degree he's talking very vaguely in a way, and it's kind of a universal message,
Yeah.
Or like Bob Dylan writes "Blowin' in the Wind," it's not specifically a Vietnam War song, you know what I mean? It's just an anti-war song that always applies, right? But then there's other guys who have made, their bones as these guys who wrote topical songs specifically, about this event or that person, da 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 da. And the reason, when the events that a topical song talks about disappear, then that song is also gone. So I didn't really want to write something specifically about the occupation at all, but I ended up sort of going with it and sort of working on it. And a lot of the music stuff I've done lately has been kind of, in one way or another, has been about like breaking my own rules, essentially. So I was like, oh sure, let's just go ahead and do this. Why not? So I worked on it for a while, and then at some point it really started coming together. I really worked on it kind of diligently for about a month probably before I got it all. It wasn't like it just all came right away. But after I started figuring out how it could work and what I could do with it, then I wanted to get it out there as soon as I could, because at that time I wasn't even sure.
Yeah, how long it would be.
Yeah, things were ebbing and flowing like crazy then with the movement. So I ended up calling up a guy that we know and love called J. Todd Green.
J. Todd Green.
J. Todd Green. And so J. Todd Green and I went into his basement. At the time, my home studio was not quite up to par, and so I asked Todd, how would you feel about just one night doing something? I had a whole idea of how I wanted to do it in a way that would, sort of be, I wanted it to be like, fast, simple, cheap.
Yeah.
I wanted to give it away for free. I wanted it to like sort of, like all those ideas were really more about sort of like aesthetic ideas, like how are you going to distribute something like this? It's like, I want to distribute it for free through Twitter via Creative Commons license and all this stuff, with the idea that instead of like trying to sell it, they can't sell your Occupy song. It's ridiculous. And so, but instead of trying to do something like that, the idea would be to give it away and to encourage people who are already involved in their own ways to pick it up and use it for their own devices, whatever, you know. Yeah. And I had people message me and tell me that they were going to use the song in, like, you know, their puppet show. And there's a couple people who, when I went to Washington, which I guess we can talk about that.
You went to Washington.
Joe Nolan goes to Washington. And so when I went to Washington, several people, found me and said, you know, oh, I'm so glad I got to hear you. I've been using your song on my stream, my live stream, or I've been using it for something on my homepage or whatever, you know, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it was cool that it's actually getting out there a bit. But yeah, on January 20th, there was a big meeting when Congress came back to Washington. There was a whole big sort of conflagration of Occupy people there. Mm-hmm. And I was already promoting the song at that point, and it was really shortly, I mean, I just really started putting the song out there, and I was contacted by some people who were organizing that, and they asked me to come and play at the event, right? Yeah. So
on the mall.
It took a little, yeah, it was kind of weird. It was kind of cold, and it had been raining in the morning, so it was a bit of an odd day, and of course we were just like, we're just a protest, man. I mean, there's no amenities, you know, to be. I mean, if, you know, there's just a bunch of cops standing there waiting to crack you if you get out of line. I sort of screwed up a few times, like sort of like you kind of like walk into this place you're not supposed to be, and you quickly realize you're not welcome to be there. But it was nice though, and I met so many wonderful people, and we had a great day. And then there was I performed. Actually, ended up performing twice. And my second performance got filmed by a couple of people. One guy who was just a photographer in the Virginia area, mm-hmm. You know, but he's a professional photographer. Yeah. But his camera, like your camera, has like, you know, video possibilities with it. So he contacted me just a few days after after I performed with, you know, this video, and found me on Facebook and all this stuff. And then his name is Jim Gerena, and then another guy, H. Paul Moon, is really an award-winning documentarian. I wish I could tell you he's got a Vimeo page. Look up H. Paul Moon Vimeo. You'll find his production company page there, and he's done a lot of interesting documentary work. And he contacted me, you know, a few weeks after I'd played, and really with this really eloquent like email about, you know, the various like sort of official videos that had been around and all this stuff, you know, regarding the event and everything, and you know, kind of outlined his own philosophy of documentary filmmaking, like referencing like Pennebaker and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is a pretty esoteric email. So it was a really eloquent, thoughtful email as well. And then he hooked me up with a segment of a documentary sort of like collage that he had put together, and this segment had my whole performance of the song, and then it went into this march on the Supreme Court that happened right after that. Ah. So and then he later on was nice about hooking me up with that thing edited down, so it was just almost more like a music video essentially of me just doing my performance. So that's been really good too, because that's just helped me to be able to promote that event, you know, and to promote the song better, you know, because people like to look at stuff. But yeah. But so it's been, yeah, so it's been kind of a surprise. Like, it's ended up getting a lot more traction and stuff, and the scene actually was nice enough at one point to republish that short documentary. Oh. So that ended up getting reposted all over the place after they did that. So yeah, we got made a little bit of noise about it. So it's been good. And the latest thing that's going to happen is Matt Christie and I. Matt Christie is a fantastic painter, Nashville painter and video artist. And so Matt Christie and I, Matt's actually made 2 videos for songs of mine. Oh. And my friend, the visual artist Chris Rubin de la Borbolla, who is based out of St. Louis, Rubin de la Borbolla. He's also a painter and a video artist, and he's made a couple of videos for my songs. I made a video for my song, and now I've got H. Paul's video of the Occupy song. And Matt was looking to get some of his videos on the Nashville Arts Channel 9 or whatever. Oh yeah. And we're still working this out. I'm having some trouble with my formats and stuff, but it should be
tricky.
Yeah, but it should be. Job. Yeah, but people should be aware of the fact that there's that I have a bunch of music videos, and that there's we're kind of working on a little thing to talk to Channel 9 about, so that'll be coming up as well.
Nice.
And I'll let you know more about that in the near future.
Excellent.
Yeah. People can find me at Facebook.
And you're a tweeter. You tweet.
Yeah, Twitter.
Twitter.
Twitter.com @ Mighty Joe Nolan.
Mighty.
Mighty Joe Nolan. Yeah. Is that all? What else?
I think we should.
We should probably stop because
Yeah.
the camera's a little weird.
Well, we're gonna have you back to continue the conversation at another time.
I would love to come back.
Yay! But thank you so much for being on our podcast, and we'll see you next time, everybody. And I'll make some show notes for the blog for this.
Can you wait?
See you later. Yeah. Bye.